Good morning. Full house, wow. Yeah, for all of us who are over 25, like me. With all of you out there, my mind just went to, oh, we're not in Kansas anymore, and then I was like, that would have been too much with my theme here. So yeah, I've been advocating DDD, maybe not as long as people like Eric and Vaughn. It definitely took me a while to come to domain-driven design, as anybody who's ever heard of alt.net might well know, with my entity framework history, which I still do so much work in. Bringing the two together. But I really evolved and learned about DDD bit by bit, and it has really changed after being a programmer for almost 30 years, since I was 2. Why is that funny? It really has changed how I perceive just looking at how to design software, how to approach creating systems. And so I just like to share that, which is what I'll be doing. So I'm assuming you all know what TLC is. I actually did a talk, this version of this talk in Spain, and realized afterwards that I hadn't explained it means tender, loving care. But I'm sure you all know that. So, oh, I turned it off. Okay, so I had a fun time making this little image. This is really how I feel about domain-driven design. Hopefully everybody recognizes that book, Eric Evans' DDD book, the first book. So yeah, I definitely have a great passion for it. But DDD's been around. That book was published in 2003. It's 14 years, right? And assuming you're all here because you're interested in it or quite passionate about it already. After 14 years, this question, why isn't it ubiquitous? And you see what I did there with that word, ubiquitous? Because it's a big, important word in domain-driven design. But why isn't it ubiquitous yet? It's a really interesting thing, and I know even Eric has talked about this and thought about this. So, I think a lot of it has to do with how people come to understand some of the concepts of domain-driven design. And I would love to ask each and every one of you to answer this question, but unfortunately we do have a time limitation. But it is a good thing to think about. I can tell you what my domain-driven design origin story was. It was with the work I was doing, any of you who are .NET developers, you might be familiar with the entity framework. And Entity Framework in its early days, Microsoft had actually, different teams at Microsoft came out with 2 different ORMs at the same time. There was not a lot of happiness at Microsoft at the time, that's for sure. And Jimmy Nilsson, who's also written a book on DDD in those early days, he had been at a QCon, so on the InfoQ site, they interviewed him with, there's a standard set of questions they usually ask their speakers or authors. And one of the last question, after the interview, the last question was, what's your favorite book? And I had not even heard of the book. I don't even know if I'd heard of domain-driven design. And this is what he said. My favorite book is domain-driven design. And he said, it's like, think. Is my mic going on and off? Yeah, okay, I'll just keep talking. And I was in the middle of writing my first tech book, and I wanted to know what that meant. What does it mean for a technical book to read like poetry? That was my inspiration to pick up the book, Eric's book. And when I first started reading it, not only is, yes, he's, like a poet, it is like poetry, and he's like a philosopher, but also because the beginning of the book is about the interaction with the domain experts and your clients. That really spoke to me because I've been programming for a long time, and that's always been a really important part of the work that I do, really getting to understand the business problems and how businesses work. I was always fascinated by that. So that was the beginning, right, of how I really found the book. So going with the Wizard of Oz theme, So given that, you know, you love DDD, like how do you help other people, right? Other people learn about DDD. I'm sure, how many of you are in places where you're really trying to figure out how to get other developers or even management to buy into it? I wish I had the answer to the management question. I plan on having some talks with some of the for a long time, as have I, and I came from a database driven, right? You get the solution you got to start working on. The first thing you do is go and start structuring the database, right? And then build from there. And you know, I kind of joke that if you're going to take that approach, say you're using SQL Server, you might as well just give your end users SQL Server Management Studio. Right? It's a little extreme, but it does help some people. And you know, it's not because they're obstinate and don't want to learn, or even afraid, and certainly not unintelligent. It's really more that they're confident in the work that they're doing, right? And they know they've been maintaining these systems. They know how these things work, and it is scary to, you know, change how you're working and suddenly not be expert at it. And especially if you're, you know, in my age, I'm in my 50s. I won't say how far in. It is. I like learning new things, but that is a really scary thing for a lot of people. So, you know, what happens is developers get stuck. When the developers are stuck, teams get stuck. And when the teams get stuck, the software gets stuck, right? And so, you know, the question is, how can you help? How can you help people get unstuck? So if we're using DDD, one of the things people say, well, how can I help my team or maybe my clients take advantage of or benefit from domain-driven design ideas as I help them shift their ways of thinking? And, you know, people will say, well, I'm not a DDD expert. I can't teach it to them. And, you know, I think there's like 2 DDD experts in the world. Vaughn, maybe in the back of the room, Paul and Eric Evans, right? The point is, you're here, you're interested in it, and learning the concepts, and you don't have to be end-to-end expert in order to share so many of the wonderful ideas in there. That's how I have evolved into it, right? So, and I am not an end-to-end expert in DDD, but I can help people take advantage of some of the great ideas in there and benefit from them right away, even if they don't have the whole thing, right? And once you start learning part of it, then you're ready to understand other concepts. So then the question is, you know, how do you do this? This is not a good approach to trying to help people learn, right? And you know, unfortunately, we're being introverts or whatever, like standard, a lot of people in our industry, you know, don't have those social skills. And also people don't really like smarty pants too much. It's not really the greatest way to try to help people understand. I was on a road trip this summer listening to, totally irrelevant, but to DDD, fascinating book called Darwin's Ghosts. And it was going through history back to Aristotle, further back even, to the people who've been working on evolutionary ideas, and revolutionary as well, but evolution and really understanding that. And they were all getting repressed century after century because of the power of the church. One of these people who was just a little earlier than Darwin. So the book is about all this work and all this thought that kind of led up to the work that Darwin did, which really finally broke through, right? So one of the people earlier in that century was a man named Robert Chambers. And the quote that I heard while I was driving along is, "The way to overturn long entrenched beliefs is not to preach, but to persuade." Right? So I know we're not preaching a religion, but sometimes, you know, people think I feel that way about DDD. But it's not about preaching, it's about persuading. And I thought I pulled over to write that quote down because I was getting ready to do this talk. So you can persuade, you can use kindness, right? You can guide people. You can still be kind and still get the job done. And I really like using Glinda, the good witch, as an example, because she was all like sweetness and light, but she also got the job done, right? People don't think about this or talk about this a lot with her. She was gleeful about her sisters, right? Getting decimated by a house. She spent the whole story with Dorothy trying to help Dorothy kill the other witch, right? So she is kind, she's guiding, she's helping, but she's definitely getting the job done. So what I want to do is share with you first some coaching strategies that I use when I work with teams, and then some technical strategies, and then some of my stories from when I've been working with clients, just a little bit of practice. I was doing a different version of this talk a couple years ago. Actually, it was at the Agile Alliance Technical Conference we were at together. Rebecca was there. And I was going into a lot more technical detail. So I'd contacted one of the clients I'd worked with to ask if it was okay to go to a certain level of technical detail about the work we had done. And this is what he replied, which after I finished going, oh my God, I'm so touched. I think that's worth sharing, right? Because just it validates some of the things I'm going to be sharing with you. But also, it's amazing to be able to help people like this, to help his team like this. And I want to help you. I'm giving you my secrets. So the typical client I'm working with when I'm going into work, and understand, I'm working as a consultant. I'm not an employee, a member on a team. Usually they're rewriting a legacy app. Maybe it's become too difficult to maintain, or they want to take advantage of modern software practices and modern tools that are available to them. And they also do recognize that they're stuck in old ways of thinking, right? So they really need somebody external, which is why they're calling me, to kind of help them move out of those ways. And key for me, because I'm a consultant, not a member of the team, we already have the buy-in from the management, right? They already committed to having me come in, to writing the checks, and to have people on the teams take time out of their production to come and work with me, right? And that's a huge commitment. So that last point is something I would love to hear, like I think a whole day of some other people's expertise on making that happen, because people ask me all the time, how do you do that? And I'm like, I don't have to. I'm so lucky. I don't know. I'm sorry. So a really important part of what I'm doing is I'm not doing what I'm doing today, standing in front of a room with, especially because we're doing coding and architecture and things like that. So I'm not standing in front of the room with generic materials, generic examples, hoping that some of that will work for these teams, right? If I was doing public training, that's a very different story, but I'm working with specific companies. I'm going into companies and working with their teams. So what I'm doing is coaching them. And in fact, they call me, often people call me to ask me to come do training for them. And I say, I don't do training. I was like, you want DDD training, call Vaughn. If you want entity framework training, go watch my Pluralsight videos, like for the generic stuff. So I want to come in and really work with them on their problems, and it's a really important piece of it. These are the things that I bring to the table when I'm coming in to do coaching, and some of it's, just kind of who I am as a person, right? But other pieces of this are things that you can, even if it's not natural for you, you can still be consciously trying to achieve all these things. So empathy, that's something that I have a lot of anyway. But a lot of the people on the teams I'm working with come from the same background as me. They come from this total database-driven work. And so for them to know that I've made this transition and it really has made a huge impact on me, that's really helpful. And that is definitely very empathetic. Experience is important, right? Because I have this knowledge I'm sharing. That's already been vetted before I walk in the door, obviously. And you have to be confident, not cocky, but at least confident in what you're sharing, because it's hard for people to learn from you if you're really wavering a lot. But there's a balance there. Persistence, gentle persistence, is also really important, because these are things that are really entrenched, a lot of these ideas and patterns that people have been using for years, it's going to take some effort for them to kind of see the light and then, think they see the light, and then maybe they, get confused again. And you just keep bringing them back, bringing them forward again. There's a lot of instinct for me going into this, and some of it is almost psychological. And, I never learned about doing this. It's all been from my own instinct and the seat of my pants. But working with teams, there's all kinds of dynamics in there and all kinds of personalities. So I have to pay attention to things like, if I see maybe there's, some issues between some of the people on the teams, I want to make sure that I'm not doing something that will flare those up, right? I want to make sure everybody's working. So a lot of instincts. And then objectivity, I think, is really important also. This is something I always insist on. I don't usually get pushback on it, but I make sure that I'm doing this, which is, I'm not training, so it's not a room full of people. We're usually at a conference table, and I make sure I'm sitting in the middle of it, not at the head of it. I want to be part of the team. I want them to see me as part of the team, not as, some external person who's, I'm telling you the truth about everything. So I really want to be working with them. I have my own goals when I'm walking in to work with a client. This is DDD, right, for me, the bounded context, helping them breaking down their big problems into smaller digestible problems that they can solve, right? I mean, that's like the key of DDD. And also gaining new perspective on their domain, because again, they're stuck, the team's stuck, the software is stuck. A lot of times, and you may have seen this, people will do, maybe evolve their software or do a rewrite, and all they're doing is just writing the same software with new tools or a new language or something. And this is just a great opportunity to take advantage of all the things we've learned about software design, processes, and things like that over the years. And, so get them to step back and reimagine and re-understand their domain so they can really take advantage of those things. I do a lot of work with data, and I don't necessarily mean persistence, data persistence in this case, but people do come to me for that. Like sometimes that's the primary reason they come, and then I sneak in all the DDD IDs while I'm there. But it's really important to keep an eye on how the data is flowing through the system, because that really panics people when you start breaking things apart. While I'm there, I want to make sure they understand how I'm thinking through things, the kinds of questions I'm asking, because I'm not going to stay there for months and a year, right? I'm just going in. It's like this guerrilla thing. So I want them to be able to continue asking those kind of questions and being comfortable with asking questions that might change their idea about how things are, that it's okay to keep shifting things. Most important thing I try to do while I'm with clients is just keep everybody calm, right? Because they start thinking about how everything's connected, and it's such a big system, and they're constantly in panic. And I'm always just going, okay, let's just step back a minute and let's just focus. You don't have to worry about those problems right now. We'll just focus on this problem, right? It's really a very important thing that I'm doing. When I'm walking in to work with a client, I do have some kind of standard things that I'm doing. And I'm not telling clients this is what we're going to do. I kind of have some different ideas of how I work with my clients, and I evolve that for the particular situation. And sometimes we'll do that on the fly. But this is kind of how it works out in a standard. So we'll spend a day. I'll do some advanced work, maybe with the person who's hired me, maybe be on Skype or something, to get a pretty good feel of what the business is and just the problem, and maybe sometimes a little bit of the team dynamics. I'll try to understand some of that before I go in. But when I'm in there working with them, we will spend about a day reviewing their domain, right? But not just like, one person telling me, but I'm here, by listening to everybody talking about their domain, I can hear everybody's different perceptions of it and where maybe, things are conflicting. But it's really helpful for me as I'm helping them move forward to understand that, right? And what their problems are, what they're confused about. And we look, because they're rewriting, replacing their old apps, we take a look at those also, so I can see what they, basically the flow and what they like about them and what's problematic about them after all the time they've been in use. Then we'll spend some days working together. Like we'll do mob programming if we're coding, or maybe modeling, right? That's a big, big process. And then before I leave, we spend some time reviewing what we've done, and I talk to them about, what are you going to do after I leave? Which, sometimes is a week later, somebody much higher up calls and, oh, we got to, drop everything we're working on and do something totally different. But they eventually come back to it. Even if they haven't come back to that big rewrite yet, they've already gotten all these ideas starting in their brain, and it can still impact the current work that they're doing too, which is really helpful. And of course, every scenario is different. So I'm pretty flexible based on what's going on there. When I'm there, this is all about their domain and their problems. Again, this is why I'm doing coaching and not training, like just generic public training. The public training, it's really hard to solve everybody's problems there. But this is why I do coaching, not training, so I can really focus on their problems. This is really important for me to really make sure people understand concepts before they understand the terms. We all know how important it is that everybody's on the same page with terms, but sometimes, and I know I'm like this, like somebody says, like when I first started hearing ubiquitous language, I was like, or domain services, and you get stuck, your brain gets stuck, and it's hard to start absorbing that. You might have already come up with your own idea what that means, right? And it's hard to shift to understand what things really mean. So I focus on making sure they get concepts before I tell them what the actual terms are. And I make sure they understand that the terminology is important so they can have, easy conversations with each other or external people and not have to constantly explain things. So here's an example of something I came up with just on the fly while I was working with a client. And I've been like, it was so good. So it worked really well. So I was, trying to figure out how to explain something. And I decided I'm going to call this, let's just imagine it's like a puppet master, right? And what it was for was to help them understand, like in this old way that we've done a lot of things, having objects be responsible for external things. That's really not part of their business logic, like going and populating themselves from the database, right? A lot of people will do that, like, go get my data, right? And that's part of the object. And so I explain with this puppet master idea that the puppet master is the coordinator. So I can use something that's like a puppet master instead to say it can have a method. It will know about the book. We can pass in an ID, and it will do that work. It will do the coordination between the object and the data persistence, for example. Right? And they got that. And another example, and this stresses people out, maybe you have two different objects or more that have to do something in coordination, in concert with each other. And it's like, where does it go? I could put it here, I could put it here, and it doesn't seem to make a difference, but I don't want to have it duplicated. And this we go back to the, okay, calm down. And this is where, with a puppet master, which is going to orchestrate this stuff, let the puppet master do that, right? The puppet master can coordinate between those two objects. So I give them the concepts, and then I say, oh, by the way, this could be application services or domain services, but then I give them the term. If I started with domain services, preconceived notions, so many people, services, oh, that's a web service, right? And they're stuck, right? They're stuck thinking it's got to be a web service. So I give them the concept first, and then I give them the terminology. How you speak, how you express yourself is also really important. I'm very careful not to say these are rules, right? And you have to know this. What kind of programmer are you if you don't know this, right? Or goodness, God forbid, Domain-driven design, really big topic. It's really hard to absorb all of it, so buckle up and here we go. Instead, I always say, I'm talking about guidance. This is all guidance. You all have experience and intelligence. You know what you're doing. Take the guidance and use it as it applies to you. You can shift that, right, instead of hard and fast rules. And it's also, especially when I'm working with the people who have come from the same world as me with a database first kind of designs, this is stuff helped me. You see that I went from there to here, and these are the ideas that helped me. So how you express this stuff is really important. And it's all about keeping them calm and not stressing them out. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the technical strategies I use when I'm working with the teams. First, I need them to understand it's not all just magic. The bounded context. Thank you, Eric, wherever you are, for the bounded context. And perhaps some of you are aware that Eric has, in the last bunch of years, said if I were to write the book over again, I would start with this. Right? And this is a really great place to start. So that's usually what I do, especially if we're modeling or something. And I use bounded context a lot more than just helping people design software, right? Just the concept of, an overwhelming problem. All right, let me just focus on one thing and solve that problem and not stress out about all the others. So I do have this idea, this fantasy that someday I'm going to do a talk about how bounded context changed my life. So bounded context, the ideas of it, help you figure out how to take the big problems and break them down into smaller problems. What I do with them, now I've said I focus on their problems, their domain, their business, right? Here, you can't really explain bounded context to them with their business and their domains because there's a lot of work to get there, right? So in this case, I use a pretty simplistic example, just like a canonical sales order business, right, with customers and orders and shipping and things like that. And then afterwards, we take those ideas and then we can start doing the modeling. But when I'm working even with that sales order concept, people panic right away. And I don't like that. I want them to be calm. But I know with a scenario, I know where everybody's heads are going to go because Vaughn may remember me screaming about, but the customer, remember in Portland, Maine a few years ago in front of the whiteboard, and I was like, but the customer's everywhere. Why? What do you mean I have to have different customers? Right? And so I understand. I understand when people are freaking out about that, right? Everything in the system is related. I can't break them apart, right? And I say, it's okay. We've got, the concept of foreign key. We've got an ID. We can just pass it around. Don't worry about that. I've got that one covered. Bounded contexts that have to interact with each other, right? They're used to just exposing a method from one, and then it can be called from another system. Right? And this is where I can tell them, DDD's been around for 14 years. There are proven patterns. We know how to solve that problem. So don't worry about that problem right now. I promise you we have ways about making those communications happen. Right? So, you're breaking the whole system if you're trying to divide it up. I have an analogy I think is a really apt one. And if you have ever broken your arm or have had a kid that's broken an arm, you bring them to the doctor, and often the doctor will have to re-break the arm so that it sets properly. And I explain that's kind of what we have to do here. Yes, it's going to be painful, but it's going to be worth it, right? We have to do it. What? You don't think it's going to be painful? And this is mine, right? The customer is everywhere in the system. Why? I want to reuse it. Don't make me duplicate my work, my data, all that stuff. That's really, really hard. So what I'm able to do with customer, I think customer is a really great example in this particular concept of a domain, is because everything looks like a customer at first glance, but then I can explain to them, well, when you're working with a sales order, what do you really need when you're building and solving the problems of building an order? Really, all you need is the ID. You don't need the whole customer, all their data, all of the business logic that you might need when you're doing customer management, right? You just need the ID. But if you bring along all that other stuff, then you've got side effects everywhere and things get all complicated again. Shipping, really what do you need? You just need to be able to print out a label. You don't need again, the whole customer, all of its properties, all of its business logic, and all of the problems that it will bring into a shipping system, all the side effects that you have to worry about. And this really helps them, right? This has been a really, really good example to use because people go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That really makes sense. So we do this before we start working on their domain because they have some confidence about that and some ideas about, oh, a customer isn't always going to be a customer. I just want to have this in here because this was something, again, that day that I was having my this was, Eric came over. He saw that there was a lot of consternation in the corner, and Alberto and Vaughn and everybody were trying to help me with this. And he came over and he said, well, you got to pick your poison, right? Because it may seem easier to just have that customer write it once and then just use it all over the place. But then you're going to have all these side effects and all these problems you have to solve later. So which one of those problems is harder? Which causes more pain, right? So you have to understand that. And sometimes, it's not always going to be the DDD answer, right? It might be like, a lot of times, sometimes you're just dealing with CRUD for data, and it makes sense to just do things a little more simply and not break things down. And I have bounded contexts that are really just CRUD contexts a lot in the solutions I'm working on. So I think it's a really helpful thing to keep in mind, to pick your poison. So now I want to talk a bit about some of the clients that I've been working with and just some of my experiences with these clients. So the first client I went to, they're in Canada. They were 2 years into a rewrite. When I walked in there, they were using 5-year-old technology. So they started with old technology. Now, they happened to be a .NET shop. They had an old VB6 Windows client app, like so many of us have done. And they were creating a web app. So they were using ASP.NET Web Forms. They weren't using MVC. They were using Entity Framework, the first version of Entity Framework, which didn't even have POCO support, instead of the current version, which was 5, which solved a lot of the problems they had been trying to solve in code. It was a mess. And a consultant had led them down this path, which really pissed me off. Really, like seriously, wouldn't you be mad? Like, okay, they're my client. I've been here for an hour, but I already care about them that much. And I'm furious that somebody would have put them in this position. They've wasted so much time. And they're 2 years, and they still have a lot of work ahead of them. There was another problem that was going on there. Their team members were really not working together. They were all kind of doing their own thing. And they were all big fans of this book, right? Yeah. So they really were just, this is how they were solving problems. They weren't sharing ideas. There was a class in there that they were using as a kind of a model for other classes in the system. And they had decided at one point to revise the class. But so many of the people were still copying and pasting that old class into the piece of the software they were using. It was just, there was a class they opened up that had 7,000 lines of code in it. And I'm going, okay, empathy, kindness, be kind. They were using Entity Framework, and I said, okay, well, let's see, what the model is you're working with. And they had done what we all learned, those of you who've done EF with .NET, it's an object relational mapper that Microsoft created. And the first version wasn't so great, but it has evolved a lot. But they had just pointed to their huge database with like 800 tables in it, right, and said, okay, create this big model. So they were using a visual model. They were using Code First, which had been around for a while. So they opened it up, and we sat there and waited for about a minute for it to come up because they were sharing this, and it was hosted on a server in Colorado. So it took like a minute and a half or something for it to come up, and it came up, and there was like, 800 entities and 5,000 lines with the relationships. And I I feel so bad about this still today, but I burst out laughing. It's terrible. I made up for it. So, what they had was a big mess, really spaghetti software. So what I did with them was, this huge model they were using, and it was a data model and their domain model, but you have to understand that also with Entity Framework, it has a whole mapping layer. So, that then the classes become the domain model. The mapping becomes, you map from them to the entity, what Entity Framework sees as the data model, and then it talks directly to the database. So what I did was we looked at that, and I said, let's extract something that really can easily be encapsulated. So I didn't start with something that had a lot of relationships everywhere, because they needed to practice first before they really got into that. So we identified something really small, pulled it out, and used all of the new stuff with it. Said, OK, we're going to use this with Entity Framework 5. We're going to use code first, which is, as it sounds, you're writing the code instead of depending on the database to define it. Writing the code and then creating the mappings back to the database. So we did that. Now, there was very smart people on the team. I mean, this was starting to work. They had called me. I think they'd called me because a friend of mine had gone in there to help them with some security stuff and looked at this and said, you should probably get Julie Lerman to come in and help you with this mess with the Entity Framework so you can do that. They had not imagined that we were going to go through all of this for sure. So we extracted just this piece of the model, disconnected it from, removed it from the existing model, and then started refactoring all the code that was related to it. So they had tests and everything. So we would do these refactorings, and this is what we did mob programming. We did it for a day. We would do a refactoring, and it would not build. There'd be like 1,000 errors, and then I'm like, that's OK. I've been through this before. I know what to expect, what to anticipate. That's another thing that's really important, right? I was hand-holding them through that. I had the confidence and the knowledge of what was going to happen. So I knew I was going to see this, this, that, and I knew exactly what to do about all these things. But it still took all day. And one of the things that was happening was there was this one young guy on the team. He was so smart, and he had written a lot of clever code to make up for what the first version of Entity Framework wasn't doing, but the new version took care of for you. And what's the most fun thing when you're refactoring is to delete code, right? Like, deleting code is the most awesome. But we were deleting his code, and he was fuming throughout the day. And throughout the day, change, breaking, everything's breaking, the tests are failing. OK, now we have to make the next change. It was not until about 5 to 5, and these were 9 to 5ers. It was about 5 minutes to 5 when it all finally came together. And there was definitely a couple of times through the day where I was going, oh, God, did I miss something? Am I leading them into a wall? Isn't this going to work? Because it kept failing and failing. It all fell together. It all worked. And this young guy went, oh. Finally, after daggers out of his eyes all day long. He was so pissed. So it was amazing, right? And also, as I left, we were there for another day. We I actually had a chat with their entire team about doing things like attending user group meetings, going to conferences, reading. First I said, OK, who here has kids? I'm not talking about you. You should leave work at 5 and go home and be with your family. I totally get that. All the rest of you people, though, there's an amazing user group that once a month that is 5 miles from here. There's all kinds of great resources. There was one person on the whole team of like 25 that had, was like going on MSDN and trying out things and following workshops and stuff like that. Only one. So I kind of gave them the gentlest I could lecture on taking responsibility for their careers and understanding things and how important that was. And also had a long talk with the owner of the company, who was, you imagine, there's a lot of companies like this. The whole program, they had thousands of businesses around North America using their software, but it had started with him and another guy writing a Fox Pro app 25 years before. So he understood. He was doing more business than technical at this point, we had a long talk with that. Oh yeah, we did mob programming. Has anybody here done pair programming? Okay, has anybody here done mob programming? So the difference between pair programming and mob programming is what? One person. One person. Right, that's really it. But then you do all the same kind of practices. You know, one person's at the keyboard, and they're not driving, right? They're only taking instructions. Otherwise, you know, everybody's just sitting there twiddling the thumbs. Well, that person's just going to town. So that's really, like, if you have more than one person, it's mob programming. So that's what we were doing. This, to me, was the most important outcome. They really saw the need, especially the owner of the company, saw the need for somebody at a higher level than, you know, the dev team and even the team managers to really be paying attention to software practices, what's coming down the road and everything. I thought that was an amazing outcome for that. So another client that I worked on, they were also doing a rewrite, but they hadn't started it yet. They weren't 2 years in like the other client. They had a system that was about 25 years old. I know that looks like 45 years old, but a nice little exaggeration to drive the point home, right? Their system is really old, and there were people there who had written the original system and were maintaining it. And then there was also some younger developers who were newer hires on the team. They've still been maintaining the system, but they've had been exposed to some other things. But some other people on the team, this is all they had ever done and really all they had ever known, and really had not, you know, they knew what they needed to do their job, and it wasn't important or interesting to them to keep up with technology and learn new things, which, you know, I understand to a point. So what I did when I was there was, I was there for 3 days. We spent half a day doing that review. Now here we weren't really coding, we were modeling. We spent a day, so this is where, you know, I'm explaining to them about the bounded context and trying to get the idea of, you know, customer is not really, a customer may be a customer in all these different areas, but the definition of what a customer is based on the context is going to be different. And you know, all those different things we talked about, and then started really hammering on their domain. And, you know, asking 5,000 questions. And, you know, every once in a while there would be a question, and the answer to that question would make me go, oh, well, then maybe that thing we just drew over here, we had, you know, 8 whiteboards around the room. Maybe this thing we worked on over here, I think maybe based on what you just said, maybe if we just made it be this instead. Oh, yeah, that makes more sense. And just kind of evolving and evolving. And again, they're seeing me hammering on the questions and being willing to change, like say, you know, okay, we think it's going to be like this, and then go, oh, maybe the flow would be better. Maybe instead of customers, we got to start with clients, or you know, things like that. So we spent a day and a half doing that. And then what we did was some actual coding, but not really writing the system as much as kind of mocking up the system. So again, it was a .NET shop. So we opened up Visual Studio, and we got an idea of, you know, what the different projects might be, and just kind of stub out a few of the classes so that we could see how the different objects would interact with each other, how the different projects, which were, you know, like how the different bounded contexts would work with each other, how a domain service would coordinate, be the puppet master of different things. So they just get that high level of concept of it, but it's still with their domain that we were doing that. So that was a really, really good process, because they could see it, and they could see how things really did flow properly. Because that's, you know, identifying places where you got a problem with a circular reference or something like that, right? Because we run into that kind of stuff all the time. So that was, remember I said that the data flow is really important to focus on. This was a lot of the conversations throughout the day. I had to keep coming back to the database. The database, you know, forget the database. The database is not driving it. And I understood what was going on in their minds, because I have gone through this myself. So again, just persistence, gently, empathy. And I asked a lot of questions I refer to as, why is this sky blue question? And that's really to help them try to perceive their domain in a new way, instead of looking at it down the same exact tube that they've always seen it in all the years that they've been working from it. And this quote from Eric, good design is imperfect design, right? There's a point at which you can't strive for perfection. And you have to have kind of an agreed upon point at which it's good enough, right? And move on. You can always come back to it, but you got to be able to kind of let go sometimes. And that letting go of stuff is very hard for me too. So I have to keep this in my mind, and I also like to share with people as well. This was, I thought, one of the interesting outcomes of that work. I actually spent some time with the CTO afterwards who was in these meetings. He was the guy who brought me in. He was in the room the whole time. And we had a lot of conversations about the dynamics of the team and what I thought was going on. And in response to that, he ended up doing a big reorganization on the team. Didn't fire anybody. You know, there were some people who were still having a little bit of a difficult time, but they were actually more team leads, and that was not going to be helpful going forward. You know, it was identifying the people who got it, and you could see them moving, moving in their minds, and saying, let them be a little more of the leader. So I hope nobody hated me after that. The last client I want to tell you about was a different kind of success. They were also replacing a piece of their system that was really old. Their company they've got users all over the world in like apartment complexes and things like that. The buildings, it's like the buildings have all this stuff that they manage information for their tenants. And they had a really unique approach to how they were going to design the system, this new piece of the system. And they had been told by their outsourced developers and some other people, oh, you need to, that's crazy, you should use repositories and do kind of agile and this and that. And I went in there to essentially prick pins into their ideas, right? They said, we're being told this, we don't understand why, it doesn't make sense to us. And I said, I'll come in and I'm just gonna hammer on everything, right? And at one point you're either going to say, okay, we get it, it makes sense, this will fit, or you're gonna go, nope, 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 nope. And it was nope, 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 all the way through. And there was a little bit of this at the same time. I literally had to tell one of the guys to stop yelling because he had been doing it a lot through these meetings. He was yelling at another one of the guys on this team. And I was like, Mom, I was like, you got to stop doing that. And in the end, they ended up sticking with their unique idea. Now, the team lead there, he said, well, if you think this is such a good idea, are you going to now go out and teach people that this is the way they should be designing systems? And I said, no, this is good for you, right? The other is a more, generally, a good path for a lot of systems. It isn't for yours. Your unique idea, as strange as people might think it is good for you. And if anybody questions it, you can tell them, Julie said it's okay. I even had another friend who does, he's now a technical advisor for Microsoft, and they're a .NET shop. He lives in New York. He runs the alt.NET group in New York, right? So he's a big DDD guy. He's very pragmatic. His name's Steve Bull, and I trust him a lot. I called him up. I said, can you just go in and spend like an hour or two with him just to make sure I didn't miss something, right? And he agreed that, it was, in this case, for these people, this was, as strange as it seemed, the right thing for them. So these are the things that I'm doing when I'm working with a team, right? I'm hand-holding them through some of this change so they have that guidance, so they have the confidence after I leave to continue doing those same things. And constantly calming down. Now, this whole thing about de-stressing, I swear this has come to me from Eric, because you've all seen Eric speak. He's so calm. Right? I did this talk with a little bit less in it in 30 minutes. And I was like, how am I going to do this without being like, oh, the whole time? But I was able to be calm throughout the whole thing because it's not my natural instinct. But when I'm trying to help people de-stress, it's really important. And it's also really important to remember that the work you're doing is about them, their problems, helping them. It's not about you. It's not about showing off how smart you are, right, or how powerful you are. That is my time. It's really about them and about solving their problems. So go share the love, right, whether it's DDD or just bounded context. Help your teams, your clients get unstuck. And that's it. I hope it helps.